I wasn't supposed to be home. Not tonight, not this early, not with my keys turning in the lock while the day still had light left in it, because the plan, her plan, my plan, life's plan, was simple in the way most lies are simple. I'd be gone long enough for the apartment to become a stage, and she'd have time to play whatever roles she wanted without an audience that could recognize the difference between love and performance. But sometimes life doesn't shout when it changes. It shifts quietly, with paperwork and timing and small interruptions that feel harmless until they aren't. A meeting got cancelled without explanation. A client's "We'll reschedule" hit my inbox too quickly, like they hadn't even tried to pretend. The driver, for once, took the shortcut that usually only exists on maps. I walked up the stairs with the soft satisfaction of a man returning to warmth, to routine, to a woman who would look up from the kitchen and smile at the sound of my footsteps, because that was the world I believed I lived in. And then I opened the door, stepped inside, and heard her voice. It wasn't the voice she used with me, the one that carried everyday tenderness, mild annoyance, the occasional tiredness of a long day, the calm domestic tone of, "Can you pick up milk?" and, "I'm just exhausted." This was brighter, elevated, sharpened by adrenaline, like she was holding the phone with one hand and holding her own ego with the other, laughing the way people laugh when they think the universe has chosen them. "Imagine he did me 3 times today," she said, almost sing-song, as if the sentence itself was champagne. A beat of silence followed, the kind that means the other person on the line needed a second to process it, and then came her sister's sound, first a gasp, then a laugh that was small and stunned and complicit, the laugh of someone enjoying a secret because it makes them feel included, even if it's built from someone else's ruin. Something in me tilted. I didn't move. I didn't breathe the way I was supposed to. I stood in the shadow of the hallway and felt every sense sharpen into something colder than fear, because fear is noisy and this wasn't noise, this was clarity arriving like a blade you don't feel until it's already in. 3 times, my wife repeated, softer now, smug in a way that made my stomach go still, not in sickness, but in the strange quiet of the body realizing it has been living beside a threat it never named. My name wasn't in the sentence. But the target was unmistakable. Because betrayal doesn't need a signature, it only needs familiarity, it only needs the certainty that the person being betrayed is close enough to be destroyed by details. I heard her sister again. "Are you sure he won't find out?" My wife's reply was almost tender, like she was soothing a child. "He never pays attention," she said. "He loves too blindly." That line didn't hurt like the first one. It did something else. It stripped the situation down to its core, because the affair wasn't just sex and secrecy. It was contempt, it was strategy, it was a decision she'd made long before tonight to categorize me as safe, harmless, and disposable, to treat my love as a blindfold she could tie around my eyes whenever she wanted. People think betrayal explodes. They imagine shouting, slammed doors, broken plates, dramatic exits, tears that make the hallway echo. But that's not what it does when it's real and close and precise. When betrayal is real, it collapses inward, like a star imploding into something dense enough to swallow light, and the man inside that collapse doesn't become louder, he becomes quieter, because there are moments when silence is the only thing strong enough to hold the weight of what you now know. I stepped backward without making a sound, letting the door close the way it had opened, softly, almost politely, the lock clicking like punctuation. I didn't confront her. Not because I was afraid. Because confrontation is for emotional men, men who want explanations they won't survive, men who think closure comes from watching someone cry and hearing them say the words you already know are meaningless. I didn't want her story. I wanted the truth. Unfiltered, unedited, undeniable. The kind of truth that doesn't require raised voices, only documentation. Only clarity, only proof so clean it can cut. I walked down the stairs and kept walking until my legs remembered I owned a car, and when I sat behind the wheel I didn't start the engine, I just rested my hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield as if I could see the next version of my life somewhere out there, parked quietly in the dark. For a long time, my mind refused to look directly at what it had heard, because denial is not stupidity. denial is self-defense, and it comes in familiar disguises. Maybe she was joking, maybe she was exaggerating, maybe I misheard, maybe the world is not as ugly as it sounded. But then I heard her again in my head, that bright, elevated pitch. 3 times today. And the denial slipped out of me like smoke, thin and embarrassed, leaving me with what remained, the memory of her sudden mood swings, her new, gym sessions, that made her glow in ways my presence never did, the way she started dressing with an energy that didn't belong to me anymore, the way she used to come home smelling like a version of her I never touched. I had buried it all under trust. Trust. What an expensive word. That night I drove without direction, not because I was lost, but because movement kept me from turning inward too quickly, and there are moments when you have to let the mind harden into intent before you do anything with it. Somewhere on an empty stretch of road, something settled inside me with the calm finality of a decision that had been waiting for permission. I would not ask. I would not beg. I would not stand in the kitchen and let her rewrite the truth while tears decorated her face like evidence of innocence. I would learn exactly what was happening, exactly how long it had been happening, exactly who he was, and then I would end it in a way that left no room for doubt, hers, mine, or anyone else's. Because if she decided I was blind, then she would learn the difference between blindness and quiet observation. The next morning I woke before her. I lay still for a moment, listening to her breathing, and it almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, how peaceful someone can look while their choices are ripping apart the life they sleep inside. I didn't hate her in that moment. Hate takes energy, and I was conserving mine. I got out of bed, moved through the apartment with the calm of routine, and made coffee the same way I always did, because normality is a weapon when used correctly. It lets you hide in plain sight while your mind is doing something entirely different. When her phone buzzed on the counter, she didn't stir. She'd become careless. Arrogance will do that. People who think they've gotten away with something start leaving their footprints deeper, like they want the world to see them but not recognize them. I didn't force anything. I didn't break passwords, didn't do anything dramatic. Because the truth is, in most relationships, the doors aren't locked as tightly as people pretend, not when you live together, not when you share bills and grocery lists and streaming accounts, not when trust has already handed you the keys in 1,000 small ways. I saw the missed calls. I saw the pattern. I saw messages that were deleted but not perfectly, because most people are sloppy in the exact places they think they're clever. 2 numbers appeared more often than the rest, and they were saved under names that didn't belong in her life, generic, meaningless labels that screamed, "I'm hiding." I wrote them down. I didn't confront her. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I began collecting the kind of evidence that doesn't argue, the kind that doesn't care about tears, the kind that stands in a courtroom and speaks with a voice stronger than any apology. I checked our shared accounts. The credit card she used for errands. Small charges at first, unremarkable, the kind that could pass as everyday life, coffee, parking, pharmacy, but then the repetitions, the same hotel name, the same time window, 2 or 3 days a week, always afternoons, always in the middle of the day when I was busy, when she was at the gym, when the world was supposed to be predictable. I didn't call the hotel pretending to be her. I didn't need to. I asked for records connected to our shared billing, the same way anyone can when they're dealing with a charge they don't recognize, and the person on the line was polite and bored and helpful, because to them it was just another customer trying to understand a receipt. The hotel confirmations came as PDFs, clean and cold, like the world itself was handing me evidence with no emotion attached. Room numbers. Dates. Times. And that same sequence in the margins of my mind, like a cruel echo that refused to fade. Tuesday. Thursday. Saturday. 3 times. That day, my breath didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. The collapse had already happened. What remained was steel. I hired a private investigator with a reputation for quiet work, the kind of person who doesn't ask for drama because drama is messy, And messy evidence is the easiest thing to destroy. I didn't tell him my feelings. I told him my goal. He nodded like a man who had heard every version of this story and knew exactly which parts mattered. Within a week, I had photos. Not pornographic. Not invasive. Just the kind that makes denial impossible. Her walking into the hotel with a posture that didn't belong to her marriage, her face turned slightly upward like she was breathing in a life she thought was hers now, and beside her a man whose hand rested on her back with the casual ownership of someone who believed he was welcome. I stared at those photos for a long time. Not with heartbreak. With clarity. Because heartbreak implies you want the thing you lost, and what I was seeing wasn't something I wanted anymore. It was someone else's version of my wife, and the only question left was how long she'd been carrying that version around behind my back, smiling at me as if my ignorance was part of the arrangement. And then, one evening, she came home and kissed my cheek the way she always did, quick and automatic, and asked me how my day was, and there it was, the performance, perfectly timed, perfectly practiced, and I realized something that settled like stone in my chest. She wasn't afraid of hurting me. She was afraid of being caught. Those are not the same thing. So I stopped thinking about forgiveness. I stopped thinking about repair. I started thinking about exit. Because there are moments in a man's life when he understands, with brutal simplicity, that staying would not be loyalty. Staying would be self-erasure, and no one deserves that, no matter how much they once loved. I began arranging everything quietly. I spoke to a lawyer. I opened a separate account. I gathered documents, mortgage papers, insurance policies, shared debts, the small and ugly details that people pretend don't matter until they're splitting a life into pieces. I planned my departure with the precision of someone packing for a storm. And through it all I acted normal, because normality kept her asleep. It kept her believing I was still the man she'd described to her sister, the blind one, the soft one, the safe one. There was a moment, 2 nights before the end, when she sat beside me on the couch and rested her head on my shoulder, scrolling through her phone with her thumb moving too quickly, and for a second I wondered what it would feel like to simply ask her, to watch her face, to hear the lies line up behind her eyes. But I didn't ask. I already knew. And knowing isn't enough if you can't prove it. That's what separates pain from power. Pain screams, power documents. The final piece arrived in a plain envelope from my lawyer's office, filled with printed evidence, timelines, receipts, the investigator's report, and a neat summary that read like a death certificate for my marriage, because that's what it was. There was one photo I kept returning to. Not because it was the most damning. Because it was the most symbolic. Her hand on his chest, fingers spread in a familiar gesture, and on her ring finger, my initials tattooed there in ink she once swore was forever, visible as she touched another man like it meant nothing. I stared at it until my mind became quiet. Not numb. Quiet. And then, on a night that looked like every other night, I waited until she was in the kitchen. She was cooking, humming to herself, moving with ease, wearing an apron she'd bought because she said it made her feel like home, and I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment the way you watch someone you used to know, realizing that memory and reality have finally become 2 different people. She glanced over her shoulder. "Rough day?" she asked, smiling, the same smile that used to mean comfort. I walked to the counter and placed the envelope down gently, almost politely, like I was handing her something fragile. "What's that?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just watched her open it. And there's a moment in every lie when it meets the truth and collapses. And you can see it happen in a person's face, like a curtain dropping, like a mask falling away faster than they can catch it. The color drained from her skin. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. Her eyes moved across the pages, and I watched her pupils widen as if her body had discovered the cliff before her mind could name it. "Listen," she whispered. I can explain." "I know," I said quietly. Not angry. Not broken. Just done. She stepped toward me, reaching for my hands the way people reach for something they think still belongs to them, and I stepped back, just enough to make the distance undeniable. And that was when she began to unravel, not because she loved me too much to lose me, but because losing me meant losing the safe foundation beneath her double life, losing the man who paid the bills, who kept the peace, who made her world stable enough to run wild in secret. I slid one more item across the counter. A letter. Typed. Signed. Simple. Final. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice flat in a way that startled her more than anger ever could. Everything is already arranged. She made a sound like her lungs had forgotten how to work. Please, she said, and the word came out thin, like it didn't believe in itself. Please don't do this. There's nothing to fix. I replied, still calm, because calm is what you become when you stop negotiating with reality. You ended us the moment you needed someone else to feel alive. Her knees hit the kitchen floor with a soft thud, as if her body had decided surrender was the only option left. She cried, begging, hands shaking, and if this were a different story, the tears might have mattered, the scene might have softened the edges of what happened next. But betrayal has no volume that can reach someone who has already walked past it. And then I said the part that mattered most, the part that made her stop trying to be forgiven and start trying to survive. Your sister knows. I told her, not cruelly, just factually. She heard you. She laughed. She was part of it. Her head snapped up. The shame that crossed her face was sharp and immediate, because nothing humiliates a person like realizing their private victory speech has become someone else's evidence. And I didn't say it, but she understood. The story she told herself, that she was clever, that she was safe, that I was blind, was dead. The only thing left was consequence. I packed that night. No rush. No hesitation. I moved through the house collecting what was mine with the steady rhythm of a man closing a file, and she followed me from room to room like a shadow, crying, whispering apologies that sounded smaller with every sentence, like they were shrinking in the presence of something they couldn't undo. At the closet, she grabbed my sleeve. Please don't leave me. At the doorway, she grabbed my arm. Please just talk to me. At the stairs, she stood in front of me and said, We can go to therapy, we can. But I didn't respond. Because there's a kind of silence that speaks more brutally than any sentence ever could, and sometimes the most honest answer is refusing to participate in someone else's attempt to rewrite what they've done. When I reached the front door, she caught my forearm with both hands, her grip desperate, her eyes swollen, her voice breaking into pieces. I made a mistake, she whispered. And I looked at her. Really looked. Not at her tears. Not at the version of her who used to laugh in our bed and fall asleep with her hand on my chest. I looked at the woman in front of me now, the one who had stood in the kitchen and hummed while her phone carried secrets, the one who had told her sister I never paid attention, the one who believed love was blindness. And in that moment, I didn't feel hatred. I felt distance. The kind of distance you feel when you realize the person you're staring at is not the person you married, and maybe they haven't been that person for a long time. I already left, I said softly. You just didn't notice. Her face crumpled as if the words had landed in the exact place her excuses were trying to protect, and for a second she looked like she might chase me into the night, might scream, might throw something, might finally give the situation the drama it deserved. But she didn't. She just stood there, shaking, watching me step out as if she couldn't understand how quiet endings can be, how a life can close without a bang, how a door can click and transform a marriage into a memory. I walked down the stairs. I didn't look back. Because some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. And the understanding was simple, clean, merciless. She didn't lose me when I found out. She lost me when she decided I would never see. The door clicked behind me, a final punctuation, and for the first time in a long time, the night air felt honest, like the world was no longer pretending I belonged somewhere that had already stopped being mine. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.